all this water that's sheeting off of our landscapes is running straight into the watershed, the streams, the bay. So really the largest collective point source for pollution is coming from our individual landscapes. And one of the easiest ways, most direct ways to begin stewarding that runoff is to start to help filter it on your landscapes. And that's where rain gardens come into play, and that's where terraces come into play, and that's where swales come into play. And they're all variations of the same concept of slowing and sinking and filtering runoff. So here's where we can stack the function of stewarding the runoff from our property and creating a wonderful growing space. Simplest idea would be for, let's say, a downspout coming off of somebody's house, right? That downspout's usually just running right out into the lawn, right? And the challenge with that is manyfold. One is that the rooftops on almost all of our houses in the summertime, they heat up and they're full of asphalts and chemicals, right? It rains, that rain picks up that chemical, comes down the downspout, shoots across your grass, probably picks up more chemicals and goes into the watershed, right? So a very simple, quick design with the swale in mind is come down. You always want to come at least 15 feet from a house or a structure before you start doing a swale. Before you start harvesting water into the ground, you want to pull that away from your house. So let's come 15 feet down from the downspout on a house, and let's do a smiley face swale. Let's make it 10 feet, right? So not very big. 10 feet, and it's like your arms outstretched for that water that's coming out of that downspout and coming to you. So once you've marked your contour for your swale, you then need to mark out the basin and the corresponding berm, right? So when I mark out my contours, I let that be my center point, meaning that my basin is going to be upslope. So typically your basin is going to be 24 to 30 inches for an average sized swale. Now the size of your basin is going to dictate the size of your berm. And your swale is going to be a different size, often determined by the amount of water and or the landscape that you're trying to match. Typical size is 30 inches. So I'm going to mark 30 inches above my flags, right? That will be the beginning, the top part of the basin, which will be dug to right here. This gets flipped over and this becomes the berm, right? Now your berm, I typically shoot for about, 3 to 4 feet. In the case of this berm that we're doing here, which is going to be for a tree planting on a pretty decent sized slope, we have quite a watershed of water above us, which means we do want a bit larger of a swale, right? If we had a really large amount of water coming down and we really wanted to harvest it all, we'd probably even go bigger with our swale. If we were in a small backyard, we might bring it down a little more. This would probably be 24 inches, this would probably be 3 feet. Since we're at a moderate slope, moderate amount of water, 30 inches on the basin, 4 feet on the berm. So what we're going for when we dig today is a bit, something that's like a wave, right? As smooth as possible. This sod right here that's coming out of the basin, we're gonna wanna take that, we're gonna wanna flip that so it's the top of this grass material, the sod top, so to say, gets flipped face down. Today, not as important because this thing is going to be becoming grass again. But again, if you want this berm to be something different, having that flipped over helps that die off. But by doing this anyway, we're building up organic matter. It's going to digest and break down, and we want that. It's like a little bit of a hugelculture. It's a little bit of a compost in place by doing that. We're going to shoot for 10 inches deep. And how much you dig out of your basin is how big your berm's going to be. You'll notice if someone on this section is doing it at 10 inches and then the next person's doing it at 15 inches, you're going to have a lopsided berm. You're going to have, and then also your water as it falls in is also not going to be evenly distributed. the floor of the basin ideally stays mostly level. So the sod, as it comes out, you want to put it face down so it's not regenerating, and it's also going to become part of the soil building. All that organic matter, as it dies, becomes part of the soil food web. And not being maintenance.
Up and give to people, it's not really.
Need to go, Tim. We can. This is a good example of seeing what size how big your berm will be, based on how much you've excavated out of your basin. That's probably approximately 8 inches, which doesn't sound like much, but when you start digging it out, look how much soil it is. You don't want your berm to ever get too high. If your berm gets too high, then it's more exposed to wind and actually can dry out, and there's kind of a sweet balance here. So I'm gonna say that we stick to about 8 inches. 10 inches I think might get us too high, so that we're getting enough of a berm but not too high. And then try to keep it even, and you can use the rake to even it out. We're just going to mulch around each tree, right? Which is why it would be good to kind of start to get this somewhat level, especially around the tree,
Right.
so that we can really mound up as much as we can.
Yeah, there's a lot of rocks in this one.
Okay.
Stake and hammer. Trees are basically bare root. Bare root is often the way that trees come from nurseries. In many ways, it's ideal, but the trick to working with bare root is typically doing it when the trees are dormant. In the late fall, which is a wonderful time to plant trees, really the ideal time. Late winter is the other ideal time to be planting period, perennials while they're dormant. It's less stress while they're dormant. And bare root typically means that they're grown in the ground somewhere, a nursery, and then they're dug, so you get ideally, almost all of the root system, and they're then bound with some kind of moist medium and mailed to you, or you pick them up in bulk. Compared to things that are grown in pots for many years, they have a more restricted root system, a root system that's started to spiral and really confined to a small pot for a number of years is not ideal. The tree roots want to have that freedom to move. And in either case, you ideally also want your trees to be young. You want them to be 1 or 2 year seedlings. When you get to 3 years or more, you're compromising that root system, whether you're digging it up or if it's in a pot. Those roots have then been either chopped off or they've been restricted too long, and that will begin to affect it later in its life and its resilience to disease, pests. This is a 1-year-old Chinese chestnut tree, right? So all the roots are intact. You see all that? None of them are cut off. They're not bound together. Even though this looks small and you're like, oh, it looks dinky, this is going to be a healthier tree because it's not been compromised. You want to make sure before this goes down you've got how much compost you want. Again, making sure it's not too high on your stem. And voila. You're good to go. Go do this all the way down. And then, like I say, you just pile your mulch right up and not have to worry about it so much.